Here today. On behalf of the Future of Privacy Forum, where I'm actually outside counsel to them. They are a privacy think tank based in Washington, D.C. that believes that companies need to engage in responsible data usage practices, but they also recognize that there are legitimate uses for data, and they sort of, I'd say they're a centrist privacy think tank, and you have a lot of think tanks or privacy advocacy groups who are very aggressive in their positions about restricting businesses' use of information. And then on the other side, you have certain organizations who think that there should never be any laws or rules or requirements placed on companies. So it's kind of a middle-of-the-road organization that wants companies to act responsibly. Given the last presentation, I'm not going to focus heavily on data security. I'll touch on it a little bit, and then focus more on privacy. And privacy is distinct from securing the information. Is essentially, the privacy law. It's imposing restrictions on how companies can use the information they possess, irrespective of security of it, presuming the security is in place. What uses can they make of it? What sharing can they do? What can they collect? What choices the consumers have to have, and things of that nature. So in determining a path forward for privacy, I guess we need to figure out what are we taking a path forward from. So I focus both on international and domestic privacy today. I'm going to be focusing a little bit more on sort of what's going on in the United States with the connected car space. But a path forward essentially is in many ways a path forward from figuring out how to alleviate the fears that consumers have about how their information is being used. And we've heard a lot about all of the sensors in the cars and the computing power, the connectivity. So with that comes the potential for a lot of information collection, a lot of big data uses. Information can be combined with information that's collected from other sources. And that raises some concerns and fears among consumers as to how their information is being used. Do they trust the company? Is it being sold? Is their information being tracked in such detail that all of their whereabouts are known at all times? Those are some of the issues that raise concerns among consumers. So in our view, we believe that there needs to be a careful consideration of those risks and concerns weighed against the benefits of the technologies that are being offered. And to the earlier question as to why these cars need to be connected, I think in many ways it's because consumers ultimately are demanding that connection. It's something that the market is demanding. Consumers want this kind of cool infotainment features. People spend a lot of time in their cars. If you live in the Washington, D.C. area like I do, I think we have the most congested traffic in the nation, or at least among the top 1 or 2 to 3 cities in that regard. So people are spending sometimes a couple of hours a day each way in their cars. So they want to have these options available to them. They want to have connectivity. They want to be able to do different things while in their vehicle. One thing to consider is the fears that arise are not new to connected cars, obviously. With every advance in technology, we've seen fears arise from consumers until they kind of accept and understand, and an equilibrium of sorts arises. So dating back to the late 1800s, prior to the snap photo camera being developed, people had to sit for a picture for 10 minutes or more to get the photo taken before it could be snapped, and then it would take a long time to develop. Well, in the late 1800s, Kodak came out with the snapshot photography, portable camera, and all of a sudden you had paparazzi and gossip columnists and these newspapers creating a lot of muck reports about people, and it created this huge fear of these paparazzi individuals going around taking pictures of people. Well, it actually resulted in a law review article by future Supreme Court Justice Brandeis and a colleague of his who wrote an article that advocated for privacy protections through common law tort claims based on invasion of privacy. And that's kind of how, at least in the United States, the invasion of privacy tort claim But as you can see and understand, obviously over time, people became much more comfortable with the fact that, now our phones are cameras and people just walk around taking pictures all the time. It's not alarming to us, or we're not necessarily concerned. Maybe in certain, if photos used in a certain way, or if we're in a compromising position, we might be concerned about the photo being taken, but it's not a general fear that we possess. Other things that are driving the fear. So we now are in an environment where there's a lot of sensitivity about the information that's collected about us. There's a lot of sensitivity about location information, especially. And that's been evidenced just this week on Monday. Senator Markey, the senator from Massachusetts, issued a letter to 20 of the OEMs where he essentially expressed concerns about the cybersecurity associated with connected cars, with the wireless connectivity, as well as the navigation devices that these cars possess. And he also expressed concerns about privacy. He was concerned about what is it that companies, these automobile manufacturers, are collecting and how are they using it. So he issued these letters, and he expects an answer at the beginning of January in 2014. And he's asked a series of questions that talk about what are companies doing to detect the threats that are, the cyber threats that are being potentially brought against the vehicles. What are they doing to vet the third parties that they're using to provide these services? They've asked a series of questions. How do companies respond to the intrusions? They asked about remediation. How often have you had a security incident? So these are a lot of very detailed questions that obviously companies will have some concerns in terms of how much detail they might necessarily want to go into. This isn't a request under a subpoena power or a court order. It's just a legislator who's interested in these issues asking the companies to provide information. And so he obviously has a great deal of power in the Senate Commerce Committee, so he potentially could be a driver for legislation if he's not satisfied with some of the answers. On the privacy front, he asked a lot of questions about what is the types of data that's being collected by car manufacturers. Are you collecting geolocation, speed, distance, how often, for what purposes, for what types of services? How are you recording that information? How are you storing the information? Where are you storing it? Can consumers disable the collection of this information? And what would be the ramifications of them doing so? Do you sell this information? If you're collecting a lot of sensitive information and detailed information about driving habits, is that something that there might be some third parties out there, like insurance companies or others, who would find a lot of value in that data? So what are you doing with it? Are you selling it? Have you received third-party requests for this information? Again, whether it's from an insurance company, from a government entity, and how are you responding to that type of information? So, as I mentioned at the outset, in our view at the Future Privacy Forum, we think that it's a little bit short-sighted to focus only on the fear, only on the misuse, without taking into account the context and the benefits that some of these services provide. So obviously there's a lot of the greater the connectivity, there are a lot of potential benefits that accrue to consumers and society at large. There's the issues of first responders being able to be contacted right away because of the triggers in the vehicle from an accident. There's the ability to alert drivers to certain road hazards that might be in existence. The ability to navigate around danger, the ability to detect, because of the various sensors in the car, whether the battery is about to explode, or whether the car is at risk of exploding after it's been in an accident. These are types of things that help to both individuals and as well as society. There's the ability to disable vehicles or institute slowdowns potentially, depending on the offering of the automobile manufacturer, if the car's been stolen. So many consumers might think that's a great thing. Senator Markey seems to, in his letter, he doesn't identify it as a concern, it's just one of his questions. will the vehicle be slowed down in a way that might put a consumer at risk because they're stranded in a dangerous area or something like that. But so there's a lot of these can be spun either way in terms of being risks or benefits. But we think that consumers generally like these kinds of services for the benefits that they provide in terms of safety. But there's also just general convenience. Having the onboard navigation systems are obviously convenient. There's the infotainment options we just discussed a little bit with the earlier question and why these have to be in the car. And again, consumers are really demanding that. You know, on a long trip, a lot of consumers love the concept of the car being Wi-Fi enabled, so their kid can, instead of whining and crying in the back seat, they can be connected and doing something on their iPad or whatever the case may be. You can get location-based information. There's the ability to get location-based offers. A lot of people think that if you're being presented with a coupon because you're driving by a store that you happen to frequent and like a Starbucks or something else, that's kind of creepy. Other consumers think that's great. You know, I'd love to have the ability to get a special offer going by my favorite restaurant or whatever the case may be. And then it allows for connections to a lot of other systems. So the vehicle could potentially be connected to your connected home. And when you're driving, when you get within a certain distance of the home, it can turn on the lights and start the heat or whatever the case may be to sort of make it so that when you get home, everything's sort of on and ready for you. These are things that might develop over time as we go forward. Obviously, we talked about security. It's a huge factor. It's of extreme importance. I'm probably not going to go into a lot of detail. I think we covered that topic pretty significantly. Security is something that companies need to focus on. So in addition to Senator Markey's letter, in November 19th, the Federal Trade Commission in the United States held a workshop on the Internet of Things. And that workshop was identifying concerns with the extent of data that could be collected because of the connection between vehicles and the computing power that's in vehicles and other devices that's going to arise over time, as the prior speaker mentioned, the exponential growth in these connections. But those security connections create a lot of risks. So there's more data out there to be exposed potentially, and the chairman of the Federal Trade Commission identified security as a huge risk. And then they also identified the scope of the data collected and the potential for misuse of consumer information as a result of devices being connected and collecting information about consumers. Transparency is an issue that the Future Privacy Forum has worked a lot on. There have been efforts in the United States to develop self-regulatory codes in various different areas. For example, for mobile apps, and the Future Privacy Forum developed suggestions in this process that was brokered by the Department of Commerce to have clear menus on a mobile phone, for example, that would indicate when information is being collected with easy to understand symbols. And it's that kind of thing that we think over time can be utilized in the vehicle so that there are signals to consumers that certain types of functionality might be enabled. The concern that we see arising a lot in the United States with the Federal Trade Commission and others who are critical of privacy practices is that companies try to front load or back load a lot of their privacy disclosures into lengthy privacy policies or terms of use that the average consumer doesn't read. So, how many of you read the privacy policy of, every website you go to or every service you're downloading or using? It's probably minuscule, right? No one's raising their hand, so it's minuscule. But so the concept of having just-in-time notifications of something that's popping up and displaying, kind of signaling to the consumer. Kind of like you see on mobile devices now with the location information sometimes pops up because the service requires use of location. Do you want to enable it, yes or no? We think that's important. So there are different ways that transparency can occur. Sometimes it can be a series of steps. It can be something on the Monroney label on the vehicle, coupled with something in the driver's manual in the glove box, coupled with the traditional privacy policy, and then coupled with the symbol in the car on that location being tracked at a particular time. But we do think it's important that companies consider and think about being forward-looking when providing types of notices about particularly sensitive information. But I'll just add that, as when you were talking about a lot of these earlier services that we're talking about the benefits that accrue, it's also important, in our view, to keep in mind the context in which the information is being collected, and that at some point consumers understand that, at least for certain services being offered, they understand that location information or other sensitive information is likely being collected, or else how else could you do or engage in certain of the offerings that you're making. So we think that's part of the considerations that have to be balanced. Anonymization is something that we believe is a key step to help alleviate the concerns that might exist about the use of big data. Because there are so many benefits from big data. There's a lot of information that can be discerned and derived from various data sets that companies utilize. There's been reports, for example, Google tracking flu trends, based on searches online that indicate, a greater level of searches for flu-type symptoms in one area of the country, might signal that there's a flu outbreak there. And that's just one example of big data benefits. There was another situation where researchers at the FDA, based on adverse reporting information about drug usage, noticed that consumers who were using Pravachol or cholesterol-lowering medication and those who were using some sort of antidepressant medication in combination were getting temporary diabetes symptoms. And so there was never any previous understanding that information these drugs might interact in that way. And then that information was validated based on Bing search results. So there was all of a sudden information supported by Microsoft that demonstrated, based on anonymous search results, that there were a lot of searches for people who used both drugs were demonstrating that information was being triggering these symptoms. So anonymization is definitely a useful tool to help alleviate some of the concern. So I also don't think we should lose sight of the fact that competition can be a driver for privacy. You mentioned Tesla earlier, your daughter owning a Tesla. Well, there's a widely noted report that came out earlier where a New York Times reporter, I believe, reported did a test drove a Tesla, gave a negative review of the Tesla, and then Tesla was upset by the negative review and came back and said, well, you were driving too fast, and you were driving here and driving in circles, and you were misusing the air conditioning or whatever. They had all these data points, not even thinking, I guess, that response would trigger some questions about, well, how did you know all of this information about me? They downplayed it, said they were only collecting it on reporters, but shortly thereafter they changed their practices because they're being criticized by that. The automobile industry is a competitive market segment, so different companies can adopt practices that might give them a competitive advantage. I'm not sure if I'm using enough time. The last thing I want to say is that at least the Future of Privacy Forum, we believe, again, companies need to develop responsible data usage, collection, handling practices, also secure information appropriately. But we're also concerned that if responding to those interests that might be perhaps too alarmist, there's the concern that instituting new laws could potentially stifle innovation if those laws aren't enacted in a smart grid privacy seal for third-party companies who work with utilities to provide innovative and new services based on smart grid data. And they're also involved now in a smart store privacy initiative that has developed a code of conduct that Senator Schumer and the FTC kind of blessed, again, self-regulatory effort, but it puts certain requirements on entities who are tracking individuals as they go through retail establishments based on perhaps the Wi-Fi signals in the phones. These are new developments that can result in some beneficial, innovative uses of information, but it's also has the potential to create some scary impacts for consumers as well. So that's my presentation in a general nutshell, but I'd be happy to talk about and answer any questions that you may have.
Any questions?
Comment.
Sure.
I think a lot of people blow off the privacy notices because they're overly complex. No disrespect to your profession, but there's some companies that deliberately put in these grotesquely overlong privacy statements, knowing that you won't read it, and then the little nuggets at the bottom or buried in the middle.
Right.
It says we get it all. So encouraging companies to go to a simplified, pure language as opposed to legalese would certainly help immensely. The other part too, the opt-in, allowing people to opt-in on data collections, where they see the immediate, the promise of immediate benefit if they opt-in to having the data collected. That, to my mind, is a very simple privacy mechanism.
Yeah, so there's been a long-standing debate about whether certain practices should be opt-in or whether they can be opt-out. So there's certain information be collected by default, and then the consumer's particularly concerned about it, they can decide to go on it, versus should they be required to opt into the information. And a lot of that is, there's interesting studies and effects based on, there's a lot of beneficial information that is collected from consumers on where the baseline of that information can be collected. And then, so for example, forget marketing or other tracking, but if you're going to be able to collect large data sets that then can be used to help understand how a service operates, and there can be studies done, improvements made to the service based on all these data points you have. And if you require it on an opt-in basis, studies show that very few consumers opt in unless the proposition or value to them is so significant, and therefore you're actually there's some negatives in certain circumstances if you're not allowing companies to be able to utilize large data sets of information. So that's just sort of one example of sort of contrary view on the opt-in.
More questions?
I got one question, and it might be too big to answer, but what is privacy exactly? I mean, it sounds like when you're talking about a legal definition of privacy, which makes sense to me. But you also talked about anonymization, which I don't know if that's a law or not, but that's the way computer people think about privacy. You can't be private. You're broadcasting your vehicle's precise position every tenth of a second, but you might be able to, give it a pseudo ID or anonymize it somehow. This data that you're talking about anonymizing, it is extremely hard to anonymize data because you can de-anonymize it. So how do you guys define this? I mean, what does it mean when you say the guy's privacy is protected?
Well, it depends. So anonymization, as you said, there's a lot of different ways that can occur and a lot of different use cases for it. But anonymization can be based on, it can still be sort of associated with an identifier. So you could have something that's stripped of your name and certain specific information, but it's still on a individual sort of level basis. But there's different levels of when. Again, it's not really a legal requirement. It's something that people would use to help protect privacy. But there are different levels where it might be triggered. So some companies would be concerned or think that their consumers might be concerned customers might be concerned about, not so much that they have the information, because you have a direct relationship with me as the business or company. You understand that maybe certain information has been collected and that I need to use it in certain ways, but a lot of companies are sensitive to the fact that you might be very concerned about my sharing of that information with some third party. So sometimes maybe it's not anonymized, that collection, but if I'm going to turn around and share that information with a third party, that perhaps might be the appropriate spot at which to anonymize. So it's not always immediate collection and turn into anonymization, although that can be the case in some circumstances as well.
It sounds like you have to make assumptions about this context, and the person doing the driving might not make the same assumptions as what comes up on the screen. You know, good luck getting a consistent definition of what privacy actually is between the person who's, you know, got the legal responsibility for the data, the guy doing the driving, and the poor programmer that has to code the thing.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's challenging. It's not an easy situation, and there are different conceptions of privacy. I mean, that's one of the problems. There are some people that you'll see these various polls about people's concerns about privacy, and making these numbers up, but 40% will say, "Oh, I don't really care. The company can use my information." Another 40% or 30% will be, I need to opt in every time. They shouldn't be able to use any of my information for any purpose without my permission. And then you've got different gradations of that all along the chain. So it's challenging at times to come up with sort of where the right line is.
I was just hoping for a perfect answer, but that was a silly thing for me to hope for.
Anybody else?